She thought she was saving a dying animal. She had no idea she was unchaining a king. When Tessa Reynolds found a massive, wounded wolf shackled with rusted iron in the deep woods of Washington state, she didn't run. She didn't call the police. She grabbed a pair of bolt cutters, but the moment the iron snapped, the creature didn't flee into the forest. It began to crack and shift. Bones broke and reformed. Fur melted into skin. And suddenly, she wasn't looking at a wolf anymore. She was staring at a naked, furious man who looked at her not with gratitude, but with a primal hunger. This is the story of how one act of mercy started a war, and a romance that would burn the world down. The rain in Forks wasn't just weather. It was a living, breathing entity that tried to drown you. It had been raining for 3 days straight when Tessa Reynolds decided to check the perimeter fence of the cabin she had inherited from her Aunt Margaret. Tessa wiped a mixture of mud and water from her forehead, adjusting the hood of her yellow slicker. She was 28, a former ER nurse from Seattle who had fled the city to escape a messy, dangerous divorce. She wanted silence. She wanted safety. What she found, 3 miles deep into the brooding timberlands behind her property, was neither. It started with a sound. Not a howl, but a low, vibrating thrum of pain that seemed to rattle the wet pine needles on the forest floor. Tessa froze, her grip tightening on the heavy flashlight she carried despite the daylight. The grey sky offered little illumination beneath the dense canopy. She crept forward, boots squelching in the mire, pushing past a thicket of ferns. There, in a small clearing that smelled of copper and ozone, lay a monster. It was a wolf, but the word felt inadequate. The beast was massive, easily the size of a black bear, with fur the color of midnight and charcoal. But it wasn't stalking prey. It was staked to the ground. Heavy, rusted chains were wrapped around the wolf's torso and hind legs. The metal looked old, pitted, and cruel. The chains were anchored to 4 iron spikes, driven deep into the bedrock. The wolf was panting, its breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Blood, dark and thick, matted the fur around its neck, where a collar of pure, unpolished iron dug into the flesh. "My God," Tessa whispered, the nurse in her overriding the survival instinct that screamed at her to run. The wolf's head snapped up. Its eyes were startling, a piercing, electric amber that seemed far too intelligent for an animal. It growled, a sound like grinding stones, and thrashed against the bindings. The movement caused the iron collar to sear his skin with a visible hiss of steam. Silver, Tessa realized with a jolt. It's not just iron, it's plated. She didn't believe in magic, but she knew chemistry, and she knew torture. Someone had done this deliberately. "Easy," she said, raising her hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf bared teeth that looked like serrated daggers. He was terrifying, a killing machine rendered helpless, but Tessa saw the tremor in his limbs. He was entering shock. She took a step closer. The wolf snapped, his jaws closing inches from her shin. "Listen to me!" Tessa shouted over the rain, her voice cracking with authority. "You are dying. That metal is poisoning you. I can smell the infection from here. Now, I can walk away and let the coyotes eat you piece by piece, or you can let me help." The wolf paused. The amber eyes locked onto hers, narrowing. For a long, suspended second, the forest went silent. Then, the beast lowered its head to the mud and let out a soft, defeated whine. Tessa didn't hesitate. She dropped her flashlight and sprinted back toward the trail where she'd left her ATV. She had a toolbox in the cargo bed. It took her 10 minutes to return with the heavy-duty bolt cutters. The wolf hadn't moved, his breathing shallower now. Tessa knelt in the mud, the cold seeping into her jeans. Up close, The heat radiating from the animal was intense, like a furnace door left ajar. "I'm going to cut the neck first," she murmured, her hands shaking as she positioned the jaws of the cutters over the thickest link of the collar. "It's going to be loud." She bore down on the handles. The metal was stubborn. Tessa gritted her teeth, using her entire body weight, bracing her boot against a rock. She screamed with the effort, muscles burning. Snap! The collar sprang open. The wolf took a massive, heaving breath, coughing violently. Okay, almost done," Tessa soothed, moving to the leg chains. She worked with feverish desperation. Snap, snap, snap. As the final chain fell away, Tessa sat back on her heels, wiping rain from her eyes. "You're free," she whispered. "Go on, run." The wolf tried to stand. His massive paws scrabbled in the mud. He rose to his full height, towering over her, casting a shadow that swallowed the light. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just unleashed a predator. The amber eyes met hers one last time. There was no aggression now, only a profound, confusing recognition. Then, the wolf's legs buckled. He collapsed sideways with a heavy thud, unconscious. Tessa cursed. She couldn't leave him. Not after this. She retrieved the tarp from her ATV. It took 40 minutes of grueling physical labor to roll the unconscious, massive beast onto the tarp and drag him, inch by agonizing inch, to the vehicle. She used the winch to pull him onto the flatbed, securing him with bungee cords. By the time she drove the ATV back to her cabin, the sun had set. She parked in the barn, a converted workshop heated by a wood stove. She managed to slide the wolf onto a pile of old moving blankets near the heat. She ran to the house to grab her medical kit, saline, bandages, antibiotics, suture kits. When she returned to the barn, she froze in the doorway. The wolf was gone. Lying on the blankets, shivering violently, was a man. He was naked, his body a landscape of corded muscle and old scars. His hair was black and wet, plastered to his forehead. But the most shocking thing was the wounds. The raw, burned flesh where the iron collar had been was now on his human neck. The cuts on the wolf's legs were mirrored on his human thighs. Tessa dropped her medical kit. The plastic case cracked against the concrete floor. The man groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were the same electric amber. "You!" he rasped, his voice sounding like it hadn't been used in years. "You shouldn't have touched the iron." Tessa stood paralyzed in the doorway of her own barn. Her mind was trying to reject what her eyes were seeing, but the nurse in her was already cataloguing the injuries. Male, approx 30 years old, severe lacerations, hypothermia, chemical burns. "Who are you?" Tessa demanded, her hand instinctively reaching into her jacket pocket for the pepper spray she carried. "Where is the wolf?" The man tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out. He collapsed back onto the blankets, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. "Gone," he muttered. "For now." He looked up at her, pain etching deep lines into his face. He was devastatingly handsome, in a rough, dangerous way. High cheekbones, a strong jaw darkening with stubble, and a nose that looked like it had been broken once or twice. But he looked fragile, his skin pale and clammy. "I need water," he gasped. Tessa's training kicked in. Fear was a luxury. Stabilizing the patient was a necessity. She moved quickly, grabbing a wool blanket from a shelf and draping it over his lower half to preserve his dignity and warmth. "Don't try to move," she ordered. She grabbed a bottle of water from her workbench and knelt beside him, lifting his head. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin and over the angry red burns on his neck. When he finished, he slumped back, his eyes losing focus. "My name is Tessa," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm going to clean these wounds. It's going to hurt." The man watched her as she opened the saline bottles. "I heal fast," he murmured. "Usually." "Nothing heals fast when it's infected," Tessa countered. She soaked a gauze pad. "What's your name?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the barn door where the rain hammered against the wood. "Davies. Davies Blackwood." Tessa paused. The name sounded heavy, significant, though she didn't know why. "Okay, Davies. Hold still." She began to clean the burns on his neck. The smell of charred flesh was pungent. As she worked, she noticed something strange. The wounds were already knitting together. Where the skin had been raw minutes ago, thin layers of new tissue were forming before her eyes. "How are you doing this?" she whispered. Davies's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His skin was burning hot. "The iron. It suppresses the wolf. Now that it's gone, the healing begins. But I'm weak. I was in those chains for a week." "Who did this to you?" Davies's expression darkened, a flash of pure rage crossing his face. "Traitors. Men who think a crown can be stolen with poison and chains." He looked at her intensely. "You need to leave, Tessa. They will come looking for the carcass. If they find you here—" "I'm not leaving my home," Tessa said stubbornly, pulling her wrist free. "And I'm not kicking a naked, injured man out into a storm. You're staying until you can walk." Davies let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You have no idea what you've invited in." Suddenly, a crack of thunder shook the barn foundation. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "Great," Tessa sighed. "Power's out." She moved to light the kerosene lantern hanging on the wall. The golden glow illuminated the barn, casting long, dancing shadows. When she turned back, Davies was sitting up, staring at her with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her neck, where her pulse fluttered. "What?" she asked, stepping back. "You smell—" Davies inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. "Quiet. Like rain and sage. And you smell like wet dog and swamp water," she shot back, trying to keep her bravado. Davies's eyes flashed, not amber this time, but a glowing, luminous gold. He moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man in his condition. In a blink, he was standing directly in front of her, the blanket falling to the floor. Tessa gasped, backing up until her spine hit the workbench. He crowded her, placing his hands on the bench on either side of her hips, boxing her in. He was towering, radiating heat and raw masculine power. "I should kill you," Davies whispered, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "To protect the pack. No human is supposed to see the shift." "I saved your life," Tessa managed to choke out, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up into his eyes, refusing to flinch. "You owe me." Davies paused. He looked at her defiant face, her trembling lips. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The aggression in his posture warred with something else, something magnetic. "I know," he rumbled, his voice dropping an octave. "And that is the problem." He leaned in closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Tessa froze. She expected him to bite, to tear her throat out. Instead, he inhaled deeply, his nose grazing her sensitive skin. A shiver that had nothing to do with fear raced down her spine. "Mine," he growled, the word vibrating against her skin. "What?" Tessa whispered. "The wolf," Davies said, pulling back slightly to look at her, his eyes wild and confused. "He recognizes you. He thinks you're ours." Before Tessa could ask what that meant, the barn door burst open. The wind howled in, bringing rain and leaves. Standing in the doorway were 3 men. They wore tactical gear, drenched in rain, carrying tranquilizer rifles and crossbows. "Well, well," the leader sneered. He was a bald man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow. "Looks like the mutt found a stray." Davies spun around, shielding Tessa with his body. He was naked, unarmed and weakened, but the growl that erupted from his chest was terrifying. "Bennett!" Davies snarled. "I should have ripped your throat out when I had the chance." "You're in no position to make threats, Alpha," the man named Bennett laughed. He raised a crossbow aimed directly at Davies's heart. "Step away from the girl and we'll make it quick. Stay, and we kill her first." Tessa saw Davies's muscles coil. He was going to attack, and he was going to die. "No!" Tessa screamed. She grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench behind her and hurled it. It was a desperate, clumsy throw, but it struck Bennett in the shoulder. The crossbow misfired, the bolt burying itself in the barn floor. "Run, Tessa!" Davies roared. He didn't shift. He didn't have the energy. Instead, he launched himself at the second gunman in human form. It was a blur of violence. Davies tackled the man, his fingers digging into the man's tactical vest, slamming him into the concrete. The third man raised his rifle. Tessa didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed the kerosene lantern and threw it at the third man. The glass shattered, oil splashing over him, the flame igniting his sleeve. The man screamed, dropping his weapon to bat at the flames. "Get to the house!" Davies shouted, snapping the neck of the man he had pinned with a sickening crunch. He grabbed Tessa's hand, his grip like iron, and pulled her out of the barn into the torrential rain. They sprinted toward the main cabin, mud flying, slipping and sliding. "Who are they?" Tessa yelled over the wind. "Mercenaries!" Davies shouted back. "Hired by my brother." They slammed through the back door of the cabin. Davies locked the deadbolt and shoved a heavy oak table in front of it. He turned to her, chest heaving, water dripping from his dark hair. "My brother wants the throne," Davies said, his eyes blazing. "And now, because you saved me, you're on the kill list." Tessa stared at him, adrenaline crashing through her system. "Throne? What throne?" Davies stepped closer, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. "I am the Alpha King of the Pacific Pac. I rule everything from the Columbia River to the Canadian border. And you, Tessa Reynolds, just declared war on my behalf." He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her neck again. The golden light in his eyes was fading, replaced by exhaustion. But the hunger remained. "I need to mark you," he said abruptly. "Excuse me?" Tessa blinked. "They can track my scent. But if I mark you, if I claim you, my scent masks yours. It confuses them. It makes them hesitate, because to kill a mate is a death sentence in our laws." "A mate?" Tessa backed away. "I don't know what you're talking about." "There's no time to explain." A gunshot shattered the kitchen window, glass spraying across the floor. Davies lunged for her, tackling her to the linoleum floor as bullets chewed up the cabinetry above them. He covered her body with his weight heavy and protective. "Trust me," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "It's the only way you survive the night." Tessa looked into those amber eyes. She saw fear there, not for himself, but for her. "Do it," she whispered. Davies didn't hesitate. He pulled her collar aside, his canines lengthening, and sank his teeth into the curve of her shoulder. Tessa screamed, a white-hot jolt of electricity surging through her body. It wasn't just pain, it was a connection. A sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion that wasn't hers crashed into her mind. Protective, fury, possession, love. As Davies pulled back, licking the drop of blood from the bite mark, he looked at her with a terrifying awe. "It wasn't a trick," he whispered, stroking her cheek with a blood-stained hand. "You really are her. My Luna." Outside, the heavy boots of the mercenaries stomped onto the porch. They were surrounded. The kitchen was silent for a heartbeat, save for the rain drumming against the roof and the heavy, ragged breathing of the two people on the floor. The bite on Tessa's shoulder throbbed with a strange, rhythmic heat, syncing with the frantic beat of her own heart. "Stay down," Davies commanded, his voice a low growl. He moved off her, crouching low like a predator. He was still naked, bloody and exhausted. But the mark had done something to him. The lethargy was gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused adrenaline. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack, a primitive weapon. But in the hands of an alpha, it was deadly. The front door splintered. A heavy boot kicked it in, sending wood chips flying. Bennett walked in, followed by the two remaining mercenaries. They moved with professional precision, sweeping the room with their weapon lights. "Come out, King," Bennett called out, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Don't make us tear this little love nest apart." Tessa, pressed against the refrigerator, saw Davies's muscles ripple as he tensed. He was waiting. One of the mercenaries moved toward the kitchen island. As he passed the pantry, Davies exploded from the shadows. He didn't look human in his movement. He was a blur of violence. He swung the skillet with bone-shattering force, connecting with the mercenary's helmeted head. The man dropped without a sound. "Contact right!" Bennett screamed, spinning around. He fired his crossbow. The bolt grazed Davies's ribs, drawing a fresh line of blood. But Davies didn't slow down. He closed the distance, grabbing the barrel of the rifle held by the second mercenary. With a savage twist, he wrenched the weapon away and used the stock to smash the man's nose. Bennett dropped his crossbow and drew a combat knife, a serrated blade that glinted in the dim light. "I've been waiting to skin you for a long time, Blackwood." Davies bared his teeth, blood staining his lips. "Come and try." While they circled each other, the mercenary Davies had just downed began to stir, reaching for a handgun holstered at his ankle. Tessa saw it. Panic flared, hot and bright. If she did nothing, Davies would take a bullet in the back. She scrambled on her hands and knees toward the hallway closet. Aunt Margaret had kept a shotgun there for bears. "Please be loaded. Please be loaded." She threw the door open, grabbed the heavy Remington 870 and pumped the slide. The sound, tsk-tsk, was unmistakable. The mercenary on the floor froze, looking up at her. "Don't move!" Tessa screamed, the heavy gun shaking in her hands. The man sneered and raised his pistol. Tessa squeezed the trigger. The boom was deafening in the enclosed space. The kickback slammed into her shoulder, bruising the fresh bite mark, making her cry out. The shot went wide, blowing a massive hole in the floorboards inches from the man's head, but the shockwave and the debris blinded him. Davies used the distraction. He lunged at Bennett, catching the man's knife hand. They crashed into the kitchen table, shattering it. They rolled through the shards of glass and wood, a tangle of limbs and fury. Bennett was strong, augmented by tactical gear, but Davies was fighting for something more than survival now. He was fighting for his mate. Davies roared, a sound that vibrated in Tessa's bones. He headbutted Bennett, the sound sickeningly loud, then drove his knee into the man's gut. Bennett wheezed, doubling over. Davies grabbed him by the tactical vest and hurled him through the broken back door, out into the mud and rain. "Tessa, run!" Davies shouted, grabbing the rifle from the floor. "We have to go, now!" "My house!" Tessa cried, looking at the destruction. "They're not done!" Davies gasped, grabbing her arm. "Look!" Through the front window, Tessa saw headlights. More of them. 2 trucks were tearing up her driveway. And then, a whoosh sound. A Molotov cocktail smashed through the living room window. The curtains ignited instantly. The old timber of the cabin, dry despite the rain outside, caught fire with terrifying speed. Smoke began to pool against the ceiling. "Leave it," Davies ordered, his voice hard. "It's just wood and stone. Your life is the only thing that matters." Tessa looked at her home, the sanctuary she had run to after her divorce, the place where she was supposed to heal. It was burning. Tears pricked her eyes, but she nodded. "Go," she whispered. They ran out the back door, into the storm. The wind whipped the flames, turning the cabin into a beacon in the night. They sprinted toward the tree line, Tessa slipping in the mud, Davies hauling her up every time she stumbled. Behind them, gunfire erupted again, bullets chewing up the bark of the trees around them. They didn't look back. They plunged into the deep, dark heart of the forest, leaving the burning wreckage of Tessa's normal life behind. They ran until Tessa's lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. The terrain grew steeper, the underbrush thicker. The adrenaline that had fueled her was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion, and the stinging pain of the bite on her shoulder. Finally, beneath the shelter of a massive, overhanging rock formation, miles from the cabin, Davies stopped. He collapsed against the stone, sliding down until he was sitting in the dirt. Tessa dropped beside him, gasping for air. Did we lose them?" "For now," Davies rasped. "The rain helps, washes away the scent." He looked terrible. The healing he had boasted of earlier had slowed. The bolt graze on his ribs was bleeding sluggishly, and his skin was grey. "You're hurt," Tessa said, her nurse instincts overriding her fear. She moved to inspect his side. "I'm fine," he grunted, trying to push her hand away. "Shut up," she said sharply. "You're bleeding, you're hypothermic, and you're naked in the woods in 40-degree weather. You are not fine." Davies looked at her, a flicker of amusement crossing his pained features. "You are bossy for a human." "And you are high maintenance for a king," she shot back. She unzipped her yellow rain slicker. "Here, put this on. It won't fit. But it's better than nothing." Davies hesitated, then took the coat. He struggled to pull it on. The sleeves ended at his elbows, and it was tight across his broad chest, but it offered some protection. "The mark," Davies said quietly, looking at her shoulder where the blood had dried. "Does it hurt?" Tessa touched the spot. "It throbs. It feels hot, like a fever." "That means the bond is taking hold," Davies explained, his eyes locking onto hers. "Tessa, you need to understand what I did. I didn't just bite you. I bound your life force to mine. In our world, a mate is absolute. There is no divorce. There is no separation. You are part of the pack now." Tessa stared at him. The reality of it hit her harder than the cold. "You didn't ask." "I didn't have a choice," Davies said, his voice dropping. "If I hadn't marked you, Bennett would have killed you without a second thought. As my mate, you have status. Killing you declares war on every pack in the Alliance. It buys you time. Time for what?" "Time for me to take back my throne," Davies said, his jaw tightening. "My brother, Caleb, he orchestrated this. He poisoned me at the summit, chained me in the woods, and left me to rot so he could claim the Alpha title. He thinks I'm dead. And when he finds out you're not, then he will come for us with everything he has." Suddenly, a twig snapped in the darkness. Davies was on his feet instantly, despite his injuries. He pulled Tessa behind him, a low rumble building in his chest. From the shadows of the trees, 3 pairs of glowing eyes appeared. Tessa gripped the back of Davies's stolen yellow slicker, terrified. "More mercenaries?" "No," Davies breathed, his posture relaxing slightly. "Wolves." 3 massive wolves stepped into the moonlight filtering through the trees. One was russet-colored, one grey, and the largest one was pure white. They lowered their heads as they approached, whining softly. The white wolf looked at Davies, then shifted. The cracking of bones was sickening to hear a second time. The fur retreated, and a tall, athletic woman with platinum blonde hair stood before them. She was naked, unashamed, and looking at Davies with tears in her eyes. "Alpha," she choked out, dropping to one knee in the mud. "We thought. The rumors said you were executed." "Rise, Lydia," Davies said gently. "I am hard to kill." The other two wolves shifted. Two men, one stocky and bearded, Elias, the other young and lanky, Sam, joined them. They quickly retrieved waterproof bags they had stashed nearby, pulling out clothes. "Here, boss," Elias said, tossing a pair of tactical pants and a flannel shirt to Davies. "You look ridiculous in that yellow thing." Davies shed the slicker and dressed quickly. "Status report, Elias." "It's bad," Elias said grimly. "Caleb has seized the manor. He's telling the council that you went mad, killed the elders and ran off. He's been sworn in as acting alpha. Most of the pack is confused, scared. But the enforcers are loyal to him." Elias then looked at Tessa. He sniffed the air, his eyes widening. "Boss, why does the human smell like you, like deeply like you?" "Tessa saved my life," Davies said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She freed me from the iron, and she is my mate." Silence descended on the group. Lydia looked at Tessa with a mixture of shock and hostility. "A human Luna," Lydia whispered. "Davies, that's suicide. The council will never accept her. Caleb will use this as proof that you've lost your mind." "Let him try," Davies snarled. "We need to move. Is the safe house at Miller's Ridge secure?" "Yes," Elias nodded, still eyeing Tessa warily. "We have supplies there." "Good. We move out. Formation Delta. Protect Tessa at all costs." The trek to the safe house took another 2 hours. By the time they arrived at the secluded hunting lodge, hidden deep in the mountains, Tessa could barely walk. Her legs were trembling, and the shock of the night was setting in. Inside, the lodge was dusty but warm. Elias started a fire while Lydia focused on securing the perimeter. Tessa sat on a dusty leather sofa, staring at the flames. She had lost her home. She was being hunted by a werewolf mafia, and she was apparently married to a king she had met 4 hours ago. Davies sat beside her. He had cleaned up, and in the firelight, the power he radiated was undeniable. He took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused, and incredibly warm. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I dragged you into hell." "I was a nurse, Davies," Tessa said, looking at their joined hands. "I saw people die every day. I saw the worst of humanity in the ER. I'm not a delicate flower." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "But you need to be honest with me. If we are bonded, what does that actually mean? Because right now, I feel like I drank 10 espressos and I want to punch someone." Davies chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made her stomach flip. "That's my rage you're feeling. The bond bleeds emotions. Over time, you'll learn to shield against it. But it also means—" He hesitated. "Means what?" "It means if I get hurt, you feel it. And if you get hurt, I will lose my mind. It makes us strong, but it makes us vulnerable." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent sparks through her skin. "Why me?" Tessa whispered. "Why did the wolf choose me?" "Because," Davies said, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "You were the only one brave enough to walk into the dark and break the chains. You didn't see a monster. You saw a soul." He was about to kiss her, the air between them crackling with magnetic tension, when the door banged open. Lydia stormed in, her face pale. "Davies," she said urgently, "turn on the TV, now." Elias grabbed the remote for the old television in the corner. The screen flickered to life, showing a breaking news report. The headline read, "Breaking News. Nurse wanted for arson and multiple homicides. Tessa's face flashed on the screen, her hospital ID photo. The reporter's voice was grave. Authorities are searching for Tessa Reynolds, 28, in connection with a brutal attack in the Forks Timberlands. Police discovered the burned remains of her home, containing 3 bodies. She is believed to be armed and dangerous, and potentially accompanied by an unidentified male accomplice. Tessa clapped a hand over her mouth. He framed me. Caleb framed me. Davies stood up, his face a mask of cold, lethal fury. The windows of the lodge rattled as a growl tore from his throat. "He didn't just frame you," Davies said, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. "He just made sure you have nowhere to go but to me." He turned to his loyalists. "Call the banners," Davies commanded. "Call every wolf who still honors the old code. We aren't hiding anymore. We are going to war." The safe house at Miller's Ridge was no longer safe. The flicker of the television screen casting the "Wanted" banner across Tessa's face made the small cabin feel like a prison cell. "We have to move," Elias said, kicking dirt over the fire he had just started. "If the police are looking for her, they'll be tracking her phone, her car, her credit cards. Caleb is using the human law enforcement as his personal hunting dogs." Tessa sat frozen, staring at her own image. "I'm a nurse," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I save lives. Now the whole country thinks I burned 3 people alive." Davies knelt before her. The shift in him was palpable. The wildness of the wolf was receding, replaced by the calculating coldness of a general. He took her hands. His were steady, anchoring her. "Listen to me," he said, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Caleb controls the narrative right now, because he controls the throne. The only way to clear your name is to expose him. We don't run to hide, Tessa. We run to reload." "How?" Tessa asked, tears brimming. "We have no money, no weapons, and 3 people." "4," Lydia said from the doorway. Her hostility had cooled, replaced by a grudging respect after seeing the news. Tessa wasn't just a stray human anymore. She was a victim of the same enemy. "And we have the broker." Davies nodded grimly. "Arthur. If anyone knows where Caleb got the silver-plated iron to chain me, it's him. But he's in Seattle." "Seattle is crawling with cops," Sam pointed out, nervously checking his rifle. "Then we hide in plain sight," Davies said. He looked at Tessa. "But first, we have to kill Tessa Reynolds." 20 minutes later, in the cramped bathroom of the lodge, Tessa stared at herself in the cracked mirror. She held a pair of rusted kitchen shears. "Are you sure?" Davies asked, leaning against the doorframe. "My hair is distinctive. Long, brown, wavy," Tessa said, her voice trembling only slightly. "If I want to survive, she has to go." She began to cut. Locks of hair fell into the sink. It was a butchery, not a style. When the length was gone, leaving her with a choppy jaw-length bob, Lydia handed her a bottle of peroxide found in the cleaning cupboard. An hour later, Tessa emerged. Her hair was a stark, chemical blonde, chopped aggressively short. She wore oversized flannel and men's work boots. She looked harder, older. Davies walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He reached out, his fingers grazing the nape of her neck, exposed now. The touch sent a jolt of heat through her that made her knees weak. "It suits you," he murmured, his voice rough. "You look like a fighter." They abandoned the truck in a ravine and hiked 10 miles to a secondary road where Elias hot-wired an old sedan. The drive to Seattle was tense. Davies sat in the back with Tessa, his hand constantly touching her knee, her shoulder, her hand. The bond was demanding physical contact. It was a low-level hum in Tessa's mind, a constant whisper of "safe here, mine." They reached Seattle under the cover of darkness. The city was rain-slicked and neon-lit. They drove to the industrial district, pulling up to a nondescript warehouse beneath the highway overpass. "Stay close," Davies ordered as they exited the car. "Arthur is a vampire. He doesn't drink blood. He drinks information and money. But he's dangerous." Tessa's eyes widened. "Vampires are real, too?" "Everything is real, Tessa," Davies said dryly, "and everything wants to kill us." They entered the warehouse. It was a cavernous space filled with shipping containers converted into offices. In the center, sitting behind a mahogany desk that looked out of place on the concrete floor, was a man in a pristine grey suit. He was impossibly pale, cleaning his fingernails with a switchblade. "Davies Blackwood," Arthur said without looking up. "You look terrible. I heard you were dog food." "Disappointed?" Davies asked, stopping 10 feet from the desk. Arthur looked up, his eyes black and bottomless. He smiled, revealing nothing. "Indifferent. But I see you brought a guest, the arsonist nurse." Arthur's gaze slid to Tessa. "A bold choice for a mate." "I need a name, Arthur," Davies cut in, his voice dropping. "Who sold Caleb the containment chains? Who forged the silver iron alloy?" "Information costs," Arthur said, leaning back. "And your accounts are frozen, King." "I can pay." Tessa stepped forward. Davies tried to pull her back, but she shook him off. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her grandmother's ring, a vintage diamond and sapphire piece she had worn on a chain around her neck since the divorce. It was the only thing of value she owned. She slammed it onto the mahogany desk. "It's worth 10,000 easily," Tessa said, her voice steady. "Real gold, flawless stone." "Take it." Arthur picked up the ring, inspecting it. He looked at Tessa with amusement. "You have fire, little nurse." "Very well." He tossed a folder across the desk. "The alloy came from Kovacs Industries," Arthur said. "Victor Kovacs. He's hosting a charity gala tomorrow night at the downtown Spire. Caleb will be there. Rumor is they are finalizing a deal to supply the pack with compliance weaponry." "Compliance weaponry?" Tessa asked. "Collars," Davies spat, his face darkening. "Caleb wants to enslave the pack, not lead it. He wants to collar the alphas of the other territories to force their loyalty." "If you want to stop him," Arthur said, pocketing the ring, "you need to get into that gala. But Kovacs has security that makes the Secret Service look like mall cops." Davies picked up the folder. "We'll find a way." "One more thing," Arthur called out as they turned to leave. "The bounty on your head, Davies? It's 50 million. Every hunter on the West Coast is looking for you. Watch your back." The downtown Spire was a needle of glass and steel piercing the Seattle skyline. The gala for wildlife preservation, a rich irony, was taking place in the penthouse ballroom. In a stolen delivery van parked 3 blocks away, the mood was suffocating. "This is insanity," Sam whispered, adjusting the earpiece he was wearing. "We are walking into a lion's den." "Wolf's den," Lydia corrected, checking the load in her concealed pistol. Davies looked at Tessa. She was transformed again. With money pawned from the rest of their jewelry, they had acquired a sleek, backless emerald gown from a high-end consignment shop. It hid the bruises, but it couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. "You don't have to go in," Davies said quietly. "Lydia can take your place." "Lydia walks like a soldier," Tessa said, smoothing the silk of her dress. "And she's known. Caleb knows her scent. My scent is masked by yours, remember? And I'm the only one who knows how to access the medical servers in Kovacs' office. If the transaction records are disguised as medical supply orders, I'm the only one who can decode them fast enough." Davies stared at her. The bond surged. Pride, fear, and a burning desire that felt inappropriate for the moment. "If anything goes wrong, you run. You don't wait for me. You break the glass and you run." Okay, she lied. Let's go. They entered separately. Davies, wearing a tuxedo stripped from a drunk guest in the alley and tailored magically by the sheer breadth of his shoulders, entered through the kitchen as staff. Tessa walked in the front door on the arm of Elias, who was posing as a wealthy donor. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds, champagne, and power. Tessa felt the gazes of the elite werewolves sliding over her. They sensed something, the alpha scent on her. But the chaos of the party and the heavy perfume in the air confused them. She spotted Caleb immediately. He stood near the orchestra, holding a champagne flute. He looked exactly like Davies, but cleaner, sharper, and colder. Where Davies was rugged earth and storm, Caleb was polished marble. He was laughing with a short, stout man, Victor Kovac. Target sighted, Tessa whispered into her hidden comms, heading to the elevators. While Elias created a distraction by accidentally spilling a tray of drinks on a senator, Tessa slipped past security ropes toward the private elevators. Inside the elevator, she held her breath. She swiped the keycard Davies had lifted from a security guard in the kitchen. The light turned green. Penthouse office. The doors opened into a dark room, illuminated only by the city lights below. Tessa rushed to the computer terminal. Her hands shook as she typed. Password. Arthur had given them a decryptor drive. She plugged it in. Access granted. Come on, she muttered. She scrolled through the files. There it was. Project Obedience. Invoices for 300 silver-plated collars, shipping manifests signed by Caleb Blackwood, and a video file. She clicked the video. It was footage of Caleb poisoning their father, the former Alpha, in his sleep. Jackpot, she whispered. Davies, I have it. I have everything. Static crackled in her ear. Tessa, get out. Trap. Davies. The lights in the office suddenly blazed on, blinding her. Tessa spun around. Sitting in a leather chair in the corner, swilling a glass of scotch, was Caleb. I was wondering when you'd show up, Caleb said smoothly. He stood, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. You must be the nurse. I have to say, the blonde hair is a tragedy. You looked better as a brunette. Tessa backed up, her hand reaching for the flash drive. Ah, Caleb tisked. He pressed a button on a remote. A heavy steel partition slammed down over the elevator doors. She was trapped. Where is Davies? Tessa demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. My dear brother is currently occupied. Caleb pressed another button. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the ballroom floor. The music had stopped. A circle had formed. In the center, Davies was on his knees. Heavy, glowing electric nets were thrown over him. He was roaring, shifting partially, his claws tearing at the floor, but 4 men were holding him down with shock batons. Every time he tried to rise, they electrocuted him. Stop it! Tessa screamed at the screen. You're killing him! He's tough, Caleb shrugged. But here is the dilemma, Tessa. I don't care about the files you found. I own the police. I own the judges. But I don't own the pack. Not fully. They still whisper his name. He walked closer to her. He smelled like expensive cologne and rot. To be the true king, I need to break him completely. I need him to submit. And Davies Blackwood would never submit to torture. He would die first. Caleb stopped inches from her. He reached out and touched the bite mark on her shoulder, pressing his thumb into it hard enough to bruise. Tessa gasped, pain shooting through her. On the screen, Davies's head snapped up. He roared, a sound of pure agony. He felt it. But, Caleb smiled cruelly, he will submit for you. Caleb grabbed Tessa by the hair and dragged her toward the balcony doors. "Let's go say hello to the family." Caleb dragged her out onto the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom. The entire party looked up. Silence fell. "Davies!" Tessa screamed. Down below, Davies looked up. His face was a mask of blood and sweat. When he saw Caleb holding Tessa, a knife pressed to her throat, he stopped fighting. The fight drained out of him instantly. "Let her go," Davies rasped, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "This is between us, brother." "Kneel," Caleb commanded, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "Kneel and acknowledge me as the Alpha Supreme. Renounce your claim, or I open her throat right here in front of everyone." Tessa's eyes locked with Davies's. She shook her head. "No, don't do it." But Davies didn't hesitate. The Alpha King, the breaker of chains, the most feared wolf on the coast, slowly lowered his head. He dropped to both knees, exposing his neck in the ultimate sign of submission. "I renounce," Davies said, his voice broken. "You are the king. Just let her go." A gasp went through the crowd. Caleb laughed. It was a victorious, manic sound. "See, that wasn't so hard." He looked at Tessa, his eyes gleaming with malice. "He loves you. How pathetic." Then Caleb leaned close to her ear. "He thinks he bought your freedom. But I can't have a loose end running around." Caleb shoved her, not toward the stairs, but toward the edge of the balcony. "No!" Davies roared, surging up against the nets. Caleb didn't throw her over. Instead, he injected something into her neck with a hidden syringe. The world went sideways. Darkness clawed at the edges of Tessa's vision. Her legs gave out. "Take her to the kennel," Caleb ordered his guards as Tessa slumped to the floor, paralyzed but conscious. "And put the iron collar back on my brother. This time, weld it shut." As Tessa was dragged away, the last thing she saw was Davies fighting the nets, his eyes glowing with a red, demonic light, screaming her name until the shock batons silenced him. Tessa woke to the smell of damp stone and the throbbing pain of the mark on her shoulder. She was lying on the cold concrete floor of a wine cellar beneath the Kovac estate. "You're awake," a voice whispered from the shadows. It was Arthur, the vampire broker, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in a torn suit. "Caleb is tying up loose ends. The execution is about to start." Before Tessa could answer, the heavy iron door burst open. 2 guards dragged her out, hauling her through stone corridors until they emerged into the night air. They were in a massive, sunken amphitheater. Hundreds of wolves stood in the stands, silent and terrified. In the center of the pit, illuminated by blinding floodlights, was a heavy steel post. Davies was chained to it. He looked broken. Stripped to the waist, his body was a map of fresh cuts and burns. A new collar, thick and humming with electricity, was clamped around his neck. He hung limp, his head bowed. Caleb stood before him, holding a microphone like a rock star. "Behold!" his voice boomed. "The false king! He abandoned you to mate with cattle." Caleb pointed to Tessa as the guards threw her into the dirt. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. "Tonight," Caleb announced, drawing a long silver sword, "we cleanse the bloodline." He walked toward Tessa with the arrogance of a man who had already won. He grabbed her by her chopped blonde hair, forcing her to her knees, and raised the sword. Tessa didn't look at the blade. She looked past Caleb, locking eyes with the slumped form of Davies. She poured every ounce of her will into their bond. "Wake up." "He can't hear you," Caleb sneered. "He is drugged beyond saving." "He doesn't need to hear me," Tessa spat. "He feels me." She leaned into the blade, letting the tip slice the skin of her neck. A single drop of blood rolled down. The scent hit the air instantly. Davies's head snapped up. His eyes weren't amber anymore. They were a glowing, demonic crimson. The scent of his mate's blood triggered the feral state. Roar! The sound shook the foundations of the arena. Davies pulled against the chains. The steel post he was anchored to began to bend, the concrete cracking with a sound like a gunshot. "Kill him!" Caleb screamed, stumbling back. Before the guards could fire, the floodlights exploded, plunging the arena into chaos. From the walls, muzzle flashes lit up the night. Lydia and Elias had arrived with the loyalists. "Protect the Queen!" Lydia's voice rang out. In the confusion, Davies ripped the steel post entirely out of the ground. Dragging the concrete block behind him, he swung the 6-foot steel beam like a flail, smashing the guards aside. He turned toward his brother, his eyes burning red. "Brother," Davies growled, his voice distorted and deep. Caleb scrambled back, dropping the sword. "Davies, wait! We can share the throne!" Davies stepped forward, ignoring Caleb's pleas. "You touched her." He grabbed Caleb by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. "She is the Wolf King's heart, and you just stopped it." With a sickening crunch, Davies tightened his grip. Caleb went limp, dropping to the dirt. Silence fell over the arena. The fighting stopped. The mercenaries dropped their weapons, realizing their paymaster was dead. Davies stood panting, the red fading from his eyes, returning to deep amber. Tessa scrambled to her feet and ran to him, throwing her arms around his bloody, scarred chest. "I've got you," she whispered. Lydia jumped into the pit, handing Tessa a pair of heavy bolt cutters. "Figured you might need these again." Tessa took them, her hands steady. She looked at Davies, her eyes full of love. "Hold still." Snap. The collar fell into the dust next to Caleb's body. Davies rubbed his neck, then took Tessa's hand, raising it high for the entire pack to see. "This is not just my mate," Davies announced, his voice carrying to the back rows. "She broke the chains when I was an animal. She bled for me when I was broken. I am the king, but she is the savior." He dropped to one knee in reverence. "Long live Luna Tessa!" The crowd roared back, the sound shaking the night sky. "Long live the Luna!" Tessa squeezed Davies's hand, looking down at the man who had changed her life forever. "Let's go home, Wolf," she whispered. Davies smiled. "Yes, my queen. Let's go home." And that is the story of how Tessa Reynolds went from a runaway nurse to the queen of the shifters. It turns out, sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't the monster. It's the destiny waiting for you. I hope you guys enjoyed The Iron Vow. This story was a wild ride of betrayal, instinct, and romance. Now, I have a question for you guys. If you found a wounded wolf in the woods with chains on it, be honest. Would you run away, or would you try to set it free like Tessa did? Let me know your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more supernatural romance dramas. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a part of the next saga. I have a vampire billionaire story coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.